Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Let's talk episode 6 of Ahsoka. Spoilers ahead. So how does episode 6 fit into the wider series so far? Well, the first two episodes were typical Filoni. They were average, a lot of background information, a lot of recapping. The third episode was really tightly focused and pretty good. The only problem was it was a bit short. But I don't know if we can really blame the writing for that. That's just more the format that is, Disney plus streaming. Episode 4 made me cautiously perk up a bit and get excited. Like someone who's just survived an abusive relationship. Us Star Wars fans give our trust a little bit slower in this era. Episode 5 was for the fans. It was a big thank you from Filoni to everyone who's watched so far. And so it was a pretty good episode. And now we're here at episode 6, which, mark my words, is going to be remembered in Star Wars history as an extremely important moment, not just because of what happens on screen, but because this is really the defining episode of the first season of Ahsoka. If they get this right, the entire season probably works really well, and it's a great show. And if this show works well, what happens? Well, Dave Filoni is probably going to be given a lot more power and control over the future of Star Wars, which could be a really good thing because at this point, Star Wars has lacked an auteur, a person with a vision, which used to be George Lucas, and now we're kind of struggling. The franchise seems to be going in many different directions without a very clear picture. Filoni, he could be the one to get us there. I've always been a little hesitant to jump on the Filoni wagon completely. But yeah, I'm getting there. It's one thing to play with perception and lore, use a bit of nostalgia to win us over, like in episode 4 and 5. But journeying to another galaxy is difficult. Going to places where George Lucas has never stepped before, this is Dave Filoni's biggest challenge. And I have to say, wow, again. I have a lot of friends that aren't huge Star Wars fans, and I like asking them for their opinions on these shows. I typically know what Star Wars fans are going to think about each show because I am a very big Star Wars fan, but it's important for me to talk to not hardcore fans because they typically go into these shows with a more fresh viewing. And I think, Disney wants to target these people. They want to bring new people into the franchise, obviously. And so I always find these individuals as a good metric for whether a Star Wars show will actually do well or not. And I gotta say, all of my friends that are casual fans of Star Wars are telling me they love Ahsoka, and I think that is a terrific sign. These are the same people who said they loved Andor as well. It might have not done really well when it initially came out because of a lack of, advertising and stuff like that, but since then, it's been one of the most consistently viewed things on Disney streaming, which I think is great because it's honestly a masterpiece. I think it's the finest thing Star Wars has made in a really long time. And, up until this point, up until really these last few episodes of Ahsoka, I've really just been in the Tony Gilroy camp. I know that his view of Star Wars was limited to just the Andor series. There's not much growth from there. But sometimes it's the smaller and finer things in life that exist in small moments of time that we have to appreciate. Let's go, Brasso. That never gets old. But the other reason why I never completely bought into The Mandalorian and the Filoni-verse was I just felt like they weren't doing anything that special. The Mandalorian was fun and serialized, but I could never really take it that serious. It was just entertaining and fun. There wasn't this grand, epic feel to it, as if the fate of the galaxy hung on a thread. A thin Dathmiri Night Sister thread. But I'm starting to believe in the Filoni hype. Like a Force user who survived the horrifying 1,000 years of Sith and Jedi conflict, Filoni has emerged as a mixture of the old, Star Wars better than any other creator alive right now, combined with some hints of the new. He's starting to develop his own style and his own voice. I've always been critical of his animation style pacing and over-the-top dramatic dialogue and character action. And there is a little of that for sure in this episode, but instead of being a glaring weakness, which it was in other shows, it's now starting to feel like more of a weird tendency that he just has. It's a part of his stylistic choice. When the overall package is good, a weakness becomes eccentric quirks that are quaint and are defining instead of just annoying and jarring. And I really think Filoni should take this moment, now that he's proving that he actually knows what he's doing, to switch that cowboy hat for a golden cowboy hat, something more impressive. But yeah, arriving to Peridia. We're in a new galaxy. We're in a show that could determine the future of Star Wars. It's super exciting. Plus, the asteroid belt around the planet, it looks epic, especially when you realize that
the whales came here to die. Peridia There's a graveyard.
Yeah, that's no asteroid belt. It's a whale bone belt. That is super cool. Although, huge missed opportunity by not introducing some Japanese space whalers, who are just going around harvesting all the material and maybe keeping the lanes safe from all of the bones and whatever kind of nonsense these Purgle are up to. A lot of people die every year in the galaxy from Purgle collisions in hyperspace. This is no joke, guys, no joke. As we enter the atmosphere of the planet, we get a strange mix of vibes. The close-up flight right next to the Dathomiri witch statue reminds me a lot of the fallen statues of Jedi on Jedha. There's definitely a very ancient feel to this planet thanks to these monoliths. But given the spacing added geographic features, I get this feeling that while the statues on this planet are old, the planet itself is pretty young from a galactic timeline point of view. Flatter, wide surfaces, less tectonic plate actions. It gives me a very Icelandic vibe. It's not vibrant life, but there is life here, judging by the rain on the windshield on their shuttle as they approach the ground. I gotta say, Filoni is really coming into his own with his stylistic choices here. This is like a blend of Eastern mythology with Western mythology with sci-fi. I like to think of this as Blade Runner meets Highlander meets Miyazaki. And yeah, I'm kind of into it. I mean, Peridia is exciting. It fills me with a sense of wonder. I want to explore. Better yet, it's not Tatooine or the handful of Tatooine clones we've had to endure in recent years. So the Night Sisters we meet are terrifying to look at. I do have to mention that Filoni has changed the lore of the Night Sisters a little bit, I think, which is not a big problem. I mean, one can do this when they're a creator in Star Wars. The Night Sisters in the original canon hailed just from the world of Dathomir. They were one of the many Force-worshipping races that lived in the galaxy. But I actually think it makes sense that they hail from another galaxy. It fits into the lore that we know so far. And we talked about this in our most recent video about Morgan Elsbeth's powers. But the Dathomiri Night Sisters manipulate the Force differently from other Force users in the galaxy. Their techniques and abilities and magic are kind of alien. In at least the animated series, they would use this magical ichor that came from the planet of Dathomir itself. But now I think we're going to see that part of the lore take backseat. I've said this multiple times already, but Dave Filoni basically treats, I think, the animated content a little bit different from the live action stuff. It is for different audiences. Live action is maybe for an older audience, and so probably wants less campy stuff, less stuff that needs a lot of background explanation. He's already portrayed the world between worlds as more of a dream or a Force vision-like place rather than a physical one you can travel to, which is what it was in Rebels. And it seems like the Dathomiri witches aren't really using magical ichor, although when Merrick exploded, that definitely looked like the magical green stuff. But yeah, maybe they're just using some hidden ability with the Force, or they just connect to the Force differently. But it's definitely more subdued. And this is kind of interesting. The fact that the Dathomiri Night Sisters are from another galaxy and there are hints that there's some greater power here really makes the struggle, or the potential struggle that's coming at the end of this season and perhaps the next one, even larger and scarier. You get a sense that something epic is about to happen. Now let's talk about Baylan Skoll, our knight in relatively dim armor. In the previous video, he's shown quite a lot of emotion, including fear, which tells us that Baylan Skoll is a dependable measuring stick for the vibe in the room. And I think the vibe on this planet is really creepy and weird. I mean, Baylan Skoll seems a little bit scared and also very interested in this kind of Force that's calling to him. The Night Sisters also seem to be a little scared.
They seem eager to leave this place. Maybe we should too.
Perhaps they flee a power greater than their own. Something calls to me. Can't you hear it?
This is pretty big here. I mean, first of all, it's never good for a Force user to hear some ancient spirit calling to them, because generally that ancient spirit is going to be dark side oriented and want to possess their body or something. Or perhaps maybe this is some kind of ancient celestial being we all know, maybe related to the Celestials themselves. A terrifying Force creature that was so powerful that all the Jedi had to come together and lock her away in an area far away from everywhere because she has a really scary smile with a lot of teeth. You guys know what I'm talking about? Wink, wink. We'll talk about it more on this channel. You guys should subscribe so you don't miss that. Whatever this Force is, it sounds terrifying, and Baylan Skoll should be scared. But what really motivates him at this point is still unclear. This is what makes him such an interesting character. I think we're starting to sense a shift in how he's revealing more and more stuff about what he wants. And I think he's also drifting away from Morgan Elsbeth and Thrawn a little bit. I mean, it's clear that he's not a Sith or a Jedi. I think at this point he's just kind of tired and old. And like many of us, he sees the damage these two factions have done to the galaxy. and he wants nothing to do with it. He is a very ambitious kind of person. He seeks power, which I think is never a good thing in Star Wars. But there's also a part of me that kind of detects an Eren Yeager vibe from him, you know? Like, I actually didn't watch the last few episodes of Attack on Titan, the anime. It's because I started watching Demon Slayer, and honestly, it was just so much better done, so I couldn't get myself back into the Attack on Titan. But basically what I mean by this is I think Baylan Skoll has a certain amount of hatred for the Jedi and the Sith, and maybe just all Force users in general. Maybe he wants to sever the connection, I don't know, end things forever. Just wild speculation, nothing concrete yet. It is great that we learn a bit more about Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati. They are definitely two of the more interesting characters in this show. And I think it's great that they're mercenaries because it really reflects their nature. They're really just loyal to their own cause, loyal to some coin occasionally. And I think we're going to see them drift further and further away, as it's very obvious that Thrawn does not think very highly of Baylan Skoll.
Baylan assured me of her death.
And yet, he was once a Jedi. So, we must regard him as flawed.
Which honestly is a bad move for Thrawn. It's not very smart for him to do this. I mean, in Legends, he died not because of his enemies, but because of one of his former allies. Although, I have to say, in Legends, his last words were the following. But it was so artistically done. It's very Thrawn. He basically got stabbed in the back, and that was his remark. And I think it's kind of fitting for an artist, maybe one that sprays graffiti all over the place, to deliver that last blow to Thrawn when he inevitably dies. Again, just some wild speculation, but you know, it's kind of cool, the artist versus the art critic. Now, the appearance of Thrawn was as expected, and I'm kind of disappointed that we won't be seeing the rational and ultimately agent for good that Thrawn once was. His transformation towards being more of a generic villain is not something I wanted to see, but I think, you know, it is necessary in order to service the story, and it is a pretty damn good story, so I'll let this pass. I also am getting complete Elon Musk vibes because of all those memes. I blame the memes, but he is giving me off Elon Musk vibes, actually. The appearance of the Chimera was so epic. You can still see the Chimera on the bottom, but the rest of the ship is more a zombie vessel with missing panels and exposed deckwork. It mirrors, dare I say, the zombie-like vibe of his Stormtrooper army, huh? His army looks like a mix between the Death Troopers, the Roman Legion, and some Red Knight's sister ribbon to wrap it all together for good measure. Could it be that the same magic that created Merrick powers these individuals as well? They do sound a lot like him. I'm also loving the Golden Mask officer with the red comma. It's totally giving me Roman Centurion vibes. The red wrapping here clearly symbolizes the Night Sister's magic, but whether that's just some kind of protection or increased strength, or the revival of the dead, we just don't know yet. We do know that the subtitles call these stormtroopers Night Troopers. It's not quite Dark Troopers or Death Troopers, but night is when you sleep and death is the eternal rest, right? So there are some connections there pointing towards undead. Thrawn's second in charge is a stormtrooper named Enoch. That's biblical, just like Ezra, and like Ezra, Enoch has his own book. It's Old Testament era and post-apocalyptic in nature. Enoch was the great-grandfather of Noah. He was a devout man and a follower of God, and he was one of the patriarchs in the books of Genesis. And by patriarch, I mean a father of all man, of future civilizations and tribes. He's important. This also makes me wonder if there's some cloning nonsense going on here. Is Enoch really a patriarch, as in like he gave his genetics to all of these other stormtroopers? On an interesting side note, the Book of Enoch is no longer canon amongst Christians and Jews. There were talks about bringing it back into the canon lore, but you know, there was like this merger, blah, 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 blah. It is interesting though that Ethiopian Christians and Jews still read the Book of Enoch and consider part of the canon. And you thought only Star Wars fans have battles between canon and legends. We are clearly about to witness the unleashing of a military force that we've never really seen the likes of before in Star Wars history. I'm just imagining the gentle folk at Coruscant leaving the opera and finding themselves face to face not only with a feared stormtrooper, a ghost from the past, but one that might be decaying and undead and want to eat human flesh. This is about to get fun. I know a lot of you are going to enjoy watching the New Republic get dismantled. I also really like how the Chimera just sits on this pedestal here. Like I was missing a great opportunity to just make this literally happen. Because as far as I'm concerned, the Star Destroyer belongs in a super fan's, den or something like that. Oh, and what about these caskets? Man, what the hell are they loading up onto that ship?
This is Enoch, captain of my guard. He shall begin the cargo transfer as per my agreement with the Great Mothers.
I have seen the catacombs. It will take some time.
Now, if you watched our last episode, we talked about the Night Sister tradition of burying their dead in little packets and reviving them later on with a chant of resurrection so that they can form sort of an ad hoc zombie defense force in case their planet ever gets attacked. So maybe that's what's happening. Maybe Thrawn is taking a bunch of, corpses from the catacombs so that he could one day reanimate them while he tries to retake the galaxy. On to the other parts. I'm sure all of you guys love this howler creature. Just leave it to Dave Filoni to introduce another wolf-like creature. But honestly, if it pants like dog, and it whines like dog,
You abandoned me!
and it sits like dog, it dog. I'm starting to also like Sabine more and more. Ever since episode 4, her character has become far more interesting. I think her steadfast devotion to Ezra, who, wow, looks just like his father, all grown up, is gonna really make things interesting, because the bond between these two individuals, it's like this. They're very, very close. But of course, the fact that Sabine doesn't explain how she got here in the first place is going to create all sorts of problems for Ezra. I think the Jedi inside of him is going to be really pissed off that Sabine sacrificed the safety of the galaxy to bring him back. He didn't sign up for that. I'm also worried about these little shell dudes here. It's clear the Red Bandits and the mercenaries are going to come, and we're going to see a battle. Dave Filoni loves this samurai defends the village from bandits motif. It's very Kurosawa, which is very Lucas, which is very Star Wars. I do have to say there is one thing here that kind of reveals Dave Filoni's animation background, and it's how he makes these factions very uniform in appearance. You do this in animation so that kids can know, okay, this is one faction, this is the other faction, these are the good guys, and these are the bad guys. In this case, you have the Red Bandits and the Shell Villagers, who clearly are very different visually. I mean, this kind of lacks the subtlety you usually want for live action. It's just strange to see everyone wearing the same stuff. But again, if the overall show is good, does this really matter? Probably not. So if episode 4 really awakened my interest for the series, episode 6 has kind of proven to me that Filoni is the real deal. He knows what he's doing here. I am worried that there are only 2 more episodes. I'm worried because I'm a fan and I want there to be more. And I also realistically think that there's not enough time to finish this story, which means that, Ahsoka Season 2, we just don't know when the cutoff is for it, is probably going to happen. I actually read an article that Disney has already been preparing to make this a reality. It seems like they did the same thing they did with Andor, which is, greenlight a second season. And I think this is because Disney actually does know what they're doing, at least with these 2 shows. They knew beforehand they had something great, unlike Book of Boba Fett, which was kind of mediocre, and Kenobi, which was disappointing. I know the sequels were also very controversial and confusing, but there's a series of wins here now, guys. We have Andor, we have Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, which is pretty well received mostly. We have Rogue One, which is also pretty good. So I guess we could kind of say that Disney's batting close to 500. Things are getting interesting.